Hi everyone, it's Laura here and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video I'm going to show you how to create a winter scene using products by My Favorite Things. As a first step, I started working on my sky. I have some Bristol Smooth cardstock that I die cut using the Blueprint 27 Dynamics, and I will be doing some ink blending with distress oxides. I am using Worn Lipstick, Dusty Concord, Stormy Sky and Chipped Sapphire, and I am blending the inks using my Ranger blending brushes. And while I'm working on my sky background, I wanted to mention that My Favorite Things is sponsoring a giveaway on my channel today and offering a $25 gift certificate to one lucky winner. All you need to do is to subscribe to the My Favorite Things channel as well as my channel if you haven't already, and to leave a comment under the video on my YouTube channel. You have time until December the 5th to comment, and after that I will randomly pick a winner and announce it on my blog. So make sure to enter the giveaway, and if you like, to share it with your friends so that they have a chance to win as well. And for your convenience, I will have all the information about the giveaway as well as a link to my blog in the description box down below. And now it's time to go back to the card. Once I was done ink blending my background, I decided to heat emboss the snowflakes from the Warm and Feathered Hugs stamp set. I made sure that my oxides were completely dry before I went ahead, treated my panel with an anti-static tool, and started stamping the snowflakes in a random pattern using Versamark ink. Once I felt I had enough snowflakes on my background, I coated them with white embossing powder by Ranger. I tapped off the excess on a scrap piece of paper and I funneled it back in the jar. And finally, I used my heat gun to melt the embossing powder, applying the heat to the front and the back of the panel in order to minimize warping. And usually I like to start the heat gun a few seconds before I bring it to the paper so that it's nice and hot and it melts the embossing powder quickly, and this also helps prevent warping. For the snowy hues of my scene, I used the same scalloped rectangle die I had used on my sky background together with the Stitched Snow Drifts Dynamics to cut 3 panels out of some more Bristol Smooth cardstock. And again, I am using Distress Oxides to add shading and dimension, but this time I decided to use Tumbled Glass and Shaded Lilac. I am following the shape of the hues and blending the inks with my blending brushes. And once I'm done shading the hues, I can move on and start working on my images. For today's project, I used the My Favorite Things Warm and Feathered Hugs stamp set. This set is super adorable and I was really thrilled when MFT announced that they were going to bring Stacy Yakula's designs in their line of products. So for today's project I had to use this set. I stamped the images with My Favorite Things Black Licorice Hybrid ink on Nina Solar White 110 pounds cardstock, and I colored them with my Spectrum Noir markers. I started by coloring the owl on the sleigh, and for his face and body I chose MB4, MB3 and MB1. In order to create texture on his feathers, I am coloring the owl by adding small dots with my markers. I started with the darkest marker and I'm adding shading as if the light was coming from the top red of the screen. I then moved on to my mid-tone color, which is the MB3 marker, and with the same dotting motions I added color to most of the owl's face, leaving some space for the highlights. I filled in the highlight areas with the MB1 marker and also used it to go over the areas that I had already colored. And then I came in with those same markers again, adding a second layer of color to deepen the shadows and increase the contrast. And this is a very simple technique that will allow you to easily create texture on your images. So I encourage you to try it out because it's not very difficult, but in my opinion, it adds a very nice detail to your project. For the beak of my owl, I used BG7 and BG4. These are warm grays and I'm using just 2 colors because the area is really small. And then with the same dotting technique, I added color to the areas around the eyes and on the belly of the owl. I used TN3, TN2 and TN1. And by the way, if you want a reference for the coloring of these images, you can find a color chart on my blog, which will be listed in the description box down below. And there I will list all the markers that I used to color all the images in this project. For the sleigh, I used EB7 as my darkest marker and I added shading as well as a few lines to follow the wood pattern that's designed in this image and emphasize it even more. For my midtones, I used the EB4 marker and I extended the areas that I had previously colored, and I also added a few more lines to increase the texture in this part of the image. And finally, for my highlights, I used the EB2 and EB4 markers and the tip-to-tip technique. So I am using the EB2 marker, which is the lighter one of the two, to pick up some of the ink from the EB4 marker so that I can create an intermediate shade between the two colors and get a smoother blend. And using these 2 markers, I will fill in the remaining areas on the sleigh before I can move on and finish coloring the body of the owl. I was a little bit uncertain about how to color these areas because for a moment there I thought this was a coat, but then I figured that these are simply the wings of the owl, so I decided to color them with the same MB4, MB3 and MB1 markers, using again this dotting technique. For the scarf, I used greens and aquas, and for the color scheme of this card, I was inspired by one of the papers in the Petite Plaid 6x6 paper pad by My Favorite Things. For the greens, I used LG5, LG4 and CG3, and for the aquas, I used BT5, BT4 and BT1. I colored the rest of the owls off camera using the same colors and techniques. I only added some pinks and some cool grays on the hats and the scarves of the other 2 owls. But as I mentioned, you will find a color chart on my blog if you want to use that as a reference. And here you can see the images once they're all colored in. I really like this color scheme, and pattern papers are a great inspiration when you're short on ideas on how to color your images. I die cut the owls with the coordinating dies and I started working on the last elements for my scene. These are some trees from the Warm and Feathered Hugs stamp set that I stamped with Distress Oxide in pumice stone and die cut with the coordinating dies. And at this point I had everything I needed to assemble my cute scene. I played around with my images and with my landscape elements until I found an arrangement that I liked, and then I went ahead and actually started gluing everything together. I started by gluing my hues to one another and then I adhered them to the sky background, but I would advise that you do this step differently and that you add the hues to the sky one at a time, so starting from the one on the background, then the one in the middle, and finally the one in the foreground, because this will make it easier for you to align all the scalloped edges neatly and nicely. And this is what I ended up doing off camera. I actually separated the hues and glued them to my background one at a time, and the result was much cleaner that way. I then added one of the owls on the front hue and one on the middle one. And finally, I filled the scene with the die-cut trees, which added just the right amount of detail and dimension to the card. And you can see that if you move fast enough with liquid glue, you have a little bit of wiggle time to position things nicely and arrange the element exactly as you like. I then mounted the card on an A2 base that I cut out of one of the papers in the Petite Plaid 6x6 paper pad by My Favorite Things. And you can see that I have also stamped my sentiment on some green cardstock and die cut a banner around it using another die in the Blueprint 27 Dynamics. And finally, in order to fill my sky a little, I created some more falling snow with a Jelly Roll pen number 8. This is a white Jelly Roll pen. And I'm drawing dots of different sizes in order to create interest and variation on my sky. And because I was having so much fun with these products, I decided to create a coordinating tag to go with the card, and I used the new fold-up tags by My Favorite Things. For the base of my tag, I used the same pattern paper that I had used on the base of my card. And for the foldable element, I used some plain white cardstock. I also cut the eyelet reinforcer and a mini banner out of some green cardstock, and for the sentiment I did some partial stamping using one of the sayings in the Warm and Feathered Hug stamp set. For the banner I used the same die that I used on the card and did some repeated die cutting to get a small enough die cut to fit within my tag. For the front of the tag, I used the owl that I had colored before, and then I glued all the elements together, making sure to leave the foldable bit free to open and reveal the sentiment on the inside. And here you can see the finished projects. Before I go, I want to say thank you to My Favorite Things for sponsoring today's giveaway and for the opportunity to guest design for them in the month of November. It was a real honor for me and a dream come true. And that's it for today. If you guys enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments below, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. You can visit my blog for the full list of supplies, and I'll catch you guys soon with the next one. Ciao!